Class number 3. Kol Hamaarich Bechod. Here we go. So remember, we're building on this on the first verse of Shema. By the time we're done with this, like till their concentration of the heart is required, it's going to be about like 40 pages worth of stuff for us to keep in mind. We're saying the first verse of Shema. No biggie. We can totally do it. So bullet points of what we did until now. We focused first on the first part. Okay, Shema Yisrael, listen up, peoples. Then we said Havaya Elokeinu. These two names of Hashem, our nature, which Elokim is Tevet's nature. Havaya is the infinity, beyond nature. As a Jewish person, our nature is Havaya, is beyond nature. That we tap into something that's beyond nature, but also our job is to be within nature and bring down that which is above nature, within nature. And then last time we got into looking at Echad, that the difference between Echad and Yachid. Yachid is singular, kind of like aloneness. Echad is one. So if you say something's one, that implies that there's a 2 or 3 or 4 and a 5. Why would we say that God is one if God is Yachid? He's singular. There is only him, right? Why are we implying now that there's more? Because to our perception, within creation, it looks like there's many. And even within this plurality, God is the oneness of all plurality. All this plurality is still contained within his oneness. That's what we mean by Hashem Echad. And then it went into the whole thing about evening and then day. The first time we see there was one, it was one day. That's the first time we talk about when, in creation. And we say it was evening and it was morning one day. Because for a day to be complete, we have to have dark and then light. Evening and then morning. Specifically, the darkness, the work that we do within the spiritual darkness, the darkness brings about the light. While we're within with darkness, we try to bring about the light so that we can move the world from the stage of complete darkness to a stage of complete light. But we see that that's indicative in all that. And then we also have part of the idea of Kishem Shemagen Hashem Elokim, that the Lord your God is a sun and a shield. Elokim works as a shield for Havaya, because we can't handle this, even though why can't we have the infinite light? It's so much, why do we have to have something encasing it? Well, because we can't handle it otherwise. And we know that from the sun. The sun has such a brightness, it needs to have some sort of protection over it so we can handle the light. We can't just throw it all at you, right? We need to have a way for you to be able to take it in. Even though, you're creating a shield and that seems to dim it, but it's only because we have the shield that we can then take the light in. If we would stand within the raw heat of the sun, we wouldn't survive that. And that's the same idea with Havaya and Elokim, that the power of creation is coming from Havaya, but it can only be actualized through Elokim. And then we say that through God's goodness, he renews the work of creation every day, going to creation, because we're talking now about our purpose within all creation. What is all that? To create a world, a home, a dwelling place for God. And then we got into the whole thing about what happened with the giving of the Torah, and Har Sinai, how Moshe had to go up and he ended up debating the angels. And like, why are you going to give the son of a woman to this human? Why are you going to give him the Torah? This is precious and special, and why you can't just give it to him? And so God tells Moshe, well, speak up, figure it out. Okay, what's written in the Torah? Honor your mother and father. Looks at the angels. You have mother and father? Okay, so then this is not applicable to you. But don't be jealous. Don't worry about it. Does any of this apply to you? I'm Lord your God, took you out of Egypt. Does any of this apply to you? No. So this doesn't belong to you. This belongs to us. We need this down here. Eventually the angels are like, oh, okay, he's right. Give it to him. And we got the Torah. Great. So that's everything from last class. Now we go to this one. We're going to focus again on the last part of the Shema, of the first line. Shema Yisrael Havaya Elokeinu Havaya Echad. So we're back to our thing about the two names. The Shem Havaya and the Shem Elokim. These are two names of God. So it's the two attributes of God we're tapping into in this recital of the Shema, the saying of the Shema. The Shem Havaya, which is beyond creation. It's not limited by time. There's no limitations to it. It's a name that comes from Haya, Hova, and Yiyeh. Past, present, and future. God is past, present, and future, as in there's no time. He's all the time, so he's no time. In truth, the power of creation, as in what can actually allow for creation to come about, actually comes from that name, the Shem of Havaya. Because it is infinite and it's so much and it's etc., that's the actual name of creation. However, because, again, going back to the sun and the shield and those ideas, because we can't handle it, if all the light would just be created through this bright, the Shem Havaya, then it would just be more sun. It would just be sun, and then there's more sun. Like, hey, where's the sun rays? There's no sun rays in the sun, there's only sun. That's what would happen with Shem Havaya. So God needed a way to package the light. And how did he do that? Through this name of Elokim. So you can even say the attribute of Elokim. The name of Elokim is where creation is actualized. So the actualization of creation came through Shem of Elokim. Which again, that's why that name is related to the name of nature. When we say nature, what's nature? So sure, you think about, I'm going to go a hike in nature. But we talk about what's nature, means what are the habits of the world? What do we look around the world and we see, consider this is normal. This is the way things are supposed to be. Well, who decided this is the way things are supposed to be? Humans only say that because it's patterns that we recognize, recurring patterns. When it rains, it gets wet. When the wind blows, it gets windy or whatever, right? We're geniuses. I mean, sun heats. Okay, but who decided this is nature? We decided this is nature just because that's what we decided is what it's supposed to be. Especially when things like go beyond, past nature. We're like, oh, this is so unnatural. Really? Why? What makes this unnatural? It just means like, oh, we're not used to seeing it, so now we call it unnatural because it doesn't fit the patterns. It doesn't fit the regular patterns that we're used to. So the name of Elohim is what created that. Took the sun and said, we can't have the sun or else there would be no people, there'd be no creation. So we're going to take the sun and we're going to package it into sun rays. When we have sun rays, it looks like, oh, look, there's stuff coming out of the sun now. Not really, but it seems like that to us. And we already went through, I think we did that the first time, right? But why light is such a good metaphor, because it has to remain connected to its source. Well, that's actually why light was a good metaphor for spirituality and like the divine light. But it sort of fits the same idea. Us as creations, we think like, oh, we're not attached to our source. We all exist independently because we're just such smart, such well-accomplished, stunning and beautiful individuals. And that's not even, that's just being vague right now. That's not even getting to the specifics about how wonderful we all are. But we do not exist independently. We think we do. That's only because of the way creation came about. And this also goes back to what we learned in Tanya, that we have to think that we exist independently or there's no free choice. There's no reward and punishment. It's so obvious to choose God when you can see God. So it's the name of Elohim that allowed for this to come about. But the real power for that is coming from the name of Havaya. So obviously, next time we say Shema, these are all the things for us to think about. The divine service in the darkness of the spiritual world is replacing spiritual darkness with divine light. This demonstrates that creation is not an independent happening, but a vital part of Hashem's supernatural design. We sort of said this already earlier on, but now that we've learned more, we're going to it, that through engaging in the divine mission and through bringing about the divine light, it's proven that we're not just here. We didn't just happen. This whole thing of nature, it's just a shield for God. It's not just a matter of like, people think like, oh, this person's religious or not religious or committed or whatever. When we do the Torah mitzvos, you light Shabbat candles, you give tzedakah, you do all, eat kosher and all things we're supposed to be doing. It's not just a matter of like what religious level you're following on. It's a matter of saying, look, I know that there's more to this world. I see that this world is a place where godliness is not revealed. I'm going to reveal godliness because I know that there's more to the world than what the eye can see. I know that there's a spiritual source that we're not seeing. And not only that, but that there is purpose and there is a design for all creation. I'm recognizing that I'm fulfilling that through what I'm doing, through the Torah mitzvahs, that I'm doing. It's also just grappling with the darkness and trying to overcome it where it fits the same idea. That's also what we have, darkness and then light, right? That we had it, I think, the Gemara said that this is how the world was created. Darkness and then light occurs. This is kind of a side note. Rabbi Shneersohn was doing this whole thing of 30 letters in 30 days. 30 letters from the Rebbe leading up to the Rebbe's birthday, which is before Pesach. One of the letters was to a community had suffered. It was a terrible, terrible tragedy that had occurred. And they wanted to just pack up and go. And the Rebbe said that he had heard, I think he said the Alter Rebbe said this. I don't totally remember. But that when you look at the order of the attributes, there's kindness, there's severity, and then there's mercy and compassion. So if you're going through a stage now of judgment or a stage now that seems to be severity, what comes next is compassion. So what comes next is giving. So don't pack it in yet. You've gone through the dark part, basically. There's going to be light to follow, is basically what the Rebbe was telling them. It made me think of it because it kind of fits here, that this idea of darkness and then light kind of thing. Next, it should actually seem familiar because we saw this in Tanya, toward the end of Tanya. We have the phrase of Mibsari Echse Elokah. They'll say that's usually a hey there. From my flesh I see God. The original quote of this actually comes from Job, is where this comes from. They talk about like seeing God's judgment. But if you look at the letters of the God's name that's being used here, this is the name that's obviously that's connected to the name of Elohim. That's why it's judgment, but they're using Elokah here for judgment. But Chassidus has taken this as saying, no, we could translate it literally. From my flesh I see God, which we said last time, that was what we spoke about in Tanya. It talks about how like the brain feeds the rest of the body, so the soul gives life to the rest of the body. This is bringing this down here now also, and it's saying a person knows that there's a critical component of their being is the light and life of the soul. As in, a person knows deep down and recognize that there's something giving them life. You don't just jumpstart a person and flick a switch. There has to be something else. How do we see that? You could look at a body. I use a corpse or cadaver, but you could actually look at a human body. One that has life and one that doesn't have life. What's the difference? They both have eyes, but this body can see and this body can't see. This body can walk and this one can't walk. Why? They're both fully intact physical bodies. What is the difference between the two of them? Where you're like, well, listen, honey, maybe you haven't been out of your rock in a while, but the reason why these seem different to you is because this one's alive and this one isn't alive. Okay, but what makes it alive? Oh, everything's moving and blah, 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 blah. Okay, well, why did this one stop? How come it's not moving this one? Everything is there. If you're going to be the annoying toddler who's going to, why? Eventually, there is some sort of admission that there's something different about the one that's alive. There's something that gives it life. You even notice that people who claim not to believe in God or whatever, they'll still talk about it's in my soul. I'm like, oh, really? Where'd this soul come from? Interesting, you should talk about. Where's your soul? Huh? I don't see it. It's not showing up on the x-ray. How? Where'd you get it from? You can say, oh, it's unconscious, whatever they have. But at the end of the day, we know that there's something different about a body that's alive. A person who's religious, and through our divine service, we know that the light and the life that we have in our body is actually godliness. The soul is a godly being. So it's not just like someone flicked the switch in the right kind of way. We know that I have life and my eyes see, thank God, and my feet walk and all that, and thank God and all this kind of stuff. And that separates me because there is life within me. The more tapped in we are just to, you could say, spirituality, or the more we commit to our divine service, it's not just this life, this abstract, amorphous life. We know that this life is actually godliness that gives me life, a godly soul, etc. It takes that and it says, man is the microcosm for the macrocosm. What is the macrocosm? Is the whole world. What makes the whole world alive? What makes the whole world here? It's the divine light that's within the whole world. This is a quote from Rabbi Natan. Man is a small world and the world is a large body. The microcosm for the macrocosm. Man himself is like a small world. Basically saying the world functions in the same way. What makes this world alive? What gives it growth and there's functionality to it? Well, I don't know if there's real functionality. But the general idea there's functionality. Things happen. How does even nature occur? All this kind of stuff. But because of the divine light. It is the light and the life that makes the world alive. It goes back to that from my flesh I see God. The same way that I know deep down within that what gives me life is God. We transfer that now to the macrocosm, to the world, and say this world is here because of God. This also goes back to Tanya. We train ourselves to see God within creation. We train ourselves to see that here is God and here is God. And God should be here. Why is he being covered up? Let's reveal him. Here is God, here is God, here is God. This is all God. The same way a body is just not anything without life. Okay, it was a body, but all the parts are there, but they can't do what they're supposed to be doing without the soul, without the divine light in them. The world does, nature does what it's supposed to be doing because of the divine light that's within it. All this we think about with Echad, going to Hashem Echad, right? Havaya Echad. What are we supposed to do? You're supposed to prolong Echad. That's what it told us. You have to prolong Echad. So we want to prolong our meditation on how man can empirically perceive the oneness of Creator in all of creation. This is what we're supposed to sit upon. Where we're saying the first line of Shema. So first we said our nature is infinite. Our job is to bring the infinite down into nature. And now the second thing we think about is that empirically, as in tangibly, I can actually sense it with my own senses. I can see the oneness of the creator and all of creation. As in just because all these things exist, plurality is also part of the oneness. We are not independent entities. We just don't see the tether that connects us back to the sun. But we're all part of the sun. God is within the world, especially if you look for it. I don't know if that the Maamar actually uses this word, but I'm putting it in there because that's translation. This is what we're talking about. Hashgacha pratis, divine providence within the world. It's actually interesting because before the Baal Shem Tov, people had a general idea of Hashgacha pratis, but they thought it only applied specifically to the Jewish world. As in, for Jewish people, God is intimately aware. For everybody else, God has like a general design for creation, but then the rest of it kind of like leaves to fate or chance or whatever the idea was. It's a little bit more arbitrary. And then the Baal Shem Tov said, no, every single thing in creation is Hashgacha pratis. From this leaf that fell off the tree, and then they pick up the leaf and like, oh, look, there's a worm underneath it that just got shaded from the sun. To every animal, plant, snowflake, person, no matter if they're Jewish or not, everybody's included in Hashgacha pratis. That was one of like, I guess you could say the, like an innovation of the Baal Shem Tov to say, no, this is all inclusive. But God pays attention to everything. To everyone and everything. So why did we get started on the Hashgacha pratis thing? Because this is what we're supposed to think about with Hashem Echad. When we say Hashem Echad, we're actually supposed to think not just like, oh, God is one. Yeah, God's one. What does it mean that God is one? Within all creation, there seems to be a plurality and God is one within that. Not just that, but we can empirically see this oneness of God within all of creation. Everything is God. Here, there, and everywhere. That's where he can be found. So the first paragraph of benching of Birkat Hamazon, Kiukel Zanu Mefarnes Hakol, for he, the benevolent God, provides nourishment and sustenance to all. God is the one who he provides. This is from Ashrei. If you're familiar with Ashrei, it says, everyone's eyes look to you with hope, and you give them their food in its time. What does it mean that you give everyone their food in its time? Because business maneuverings, they cannot elicit more than has been allotted or before it's been designated. Too much attention to business schemes diverts attention from the true source of blessing. People are trying to just outsmart the system. Oh, if I do this or do that, I'll get an extra buck. You cannot get more than has been designated for you, and you cannot get it before the time that has been designated to you. They actually say that Rosh Hashanah time, Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur time, God decides how much money everyone's going to make. You cannot make more than that. You still pray daily for God, please give us our sustenance every day, because you want to have the allotted amount. Would you rather just have $5,000 at once, or would you rather have $1,000 each month so that it's this each month you have your $1,000. So the money will come to you, but how and when. But here it's also saying that you give them food in its time, as in God designates a time for you to have it, and he designates the amount that you're going to have. It's saying this in the sense of meditating on the absolute oneness leads to knowing Hashem is the only source of nourishment. You have to go to work. You have to create a keli, vessel, something to receive the blessing in. You can't just say, well, God provides everything. Farmer still looks at the field, well, I'll grow. God provides everything. Let wheat sprout forth then. Well, you have to plow. You have to make the field something that can accept the rainfall and the sun and the seed and then, et cetera, et cetera. So we still have to do our part. The point that it's kind of warning about, or I guess you could say kind of warning against, is the workaholic nature of if I just work those 5 hours more and you do that in lieu of, no, can't come to Minyan, because I'm too busy working now. Or no, I can't keep Shabbos because if I don't do this, I'm not going to get my extra $5,000. Fill in the blank, can't do the Torah mitzvah because too busy working. It's saying all you're doing right now is you're chasing after the wrong thing. You forgot who's the source of your blessing. And when God's the source of your blessing, first of all, you should put more emphasis, more focus on the true source of the blessing. If a king is the one who's going to give out the gifts, but the king's giving it out to the ministers. So you could go and try to suck up to the ministers, or you could go straight to the king. Like, hey, can I get an extra, slinky or something? You could chase after the ministers and, they've got their favorites list. Or you could go become buddies with the kings, and the king's like, yo, give them an extra slinky. Or whatever it is kids chase after these days. It's sort of that idea that, yes, we have to work because, again, God operates within nature. That's also part of the whole Havaya and Elokim. We have nature, that's the actualization of Havaya, it's the shield of the sun. So God operates within nature. It's not here, but it talks about God tries not to do miracles because God created the world and wants it to work within the natural order of things. So part of it is that we also have to try to operate within the natural order of things, also according to Torah mitzvahs. You don't cheat in your measurements, and you have to be honest in your business dealings and all that sort of stuff. Oh, if I just add the extra zero or do an extra whatever, I'll get the extra $50. No, you won't. Somehow that $50, if it's not yours, it's going to be taken. God does operate within nature, but we can still provide a vessel for him. So you could say, okay, a natural vessel would be the 8-hour workday or whatever, 6 hours, 4 hours, within the natural order of things. But the extra workaholism stuff, it doesn't achieve. It's not going to get you more than you're supposed to have, and you're not going to get it before your designated time. Because don't forget where it's all coming from. We are operating within nature. We go to work. We do a good job. But Birkas Hashem Hitasher. The blessing of God is what brings riches. Don't forget where the money comes from. And that's why it also, goes all the way back to bridges. 6 days may you work and perform all your labor. We are supposed to work. We are supposed to engage within the natural order of things, but don't forget where it's all coming from. So if you have a choice of working 17-hour shift or cozying up to God a little bit, you might want to consider which is your direct, your real direct source where all the blessing comes from. And all of this is still within Hashem Echad. All of this is for us to think about than just those two words, in addition to everything else we're already thinking about within the whole first line of Shema. That's that.